This video helps you plan your installation of the Progress DataDirect hybrid data pipeline. You'll become familiar with the data pipeline components and options, so you'll be prepared for a quick, easy, and successful installation. The data pipeline is a lightweight data access platform that provides simple, secure access to your data sources. Because your data sources, your applications, and the platform itself may reside in the cloud or on-premises, flexibility and control are integral features. You can deploy the data pipeline in the way that best meets your organization's needs. Before starting your planning, please review these user assistance videos. The first gives an overview of the data pipeline, while the second describes common deployment scenarios. A link to the user assistance page is available in the information panel. In this video, we'll help you plan your installation. We'll look at the types of licenses, the data pipeline components you need and the requirements for each component, and the recommended order for installing those components. There are two types of licenses for the data pipeline. An evaluation license lets you install all components and fully test your architecture, connections, and procedures. But it's intended only for temporary use, so it expires after 90 days and cannot be extended. Do not create a lot of users or data sources because that information may be lost once the evaluation period ends. Once you have a license key, you can easily convert an evaluation license to a regular license on the same server during the evaluation period without loss of data. Now, let's review the data pipeline components and requirements so you'll know which components you need to install. The first component which is required is the data pipeline server software. You'll need to install the software on a server that's either on-premises or in a private or third-party cloud. The data pipeline server software must be installed on a 64-bit Linux machine with a minimum of 4 CPUs, 8 GB of RAM, and 60 GB of disk space. Supported operating systems are CentOS, Oracle, Red Hat Enterprise, and SUSE. This is a list of default ports used by the data pipeline server. If any are not available, you should identify alternate ports ahead of time. Otherwise, if the data pipeline installer encounters a port conflict during installation, you have to resolve the conflict right then to continue with installation. The second required component is a security certificate, which is used to establish a trusted, encrypted connection between the data pipeline server and a client, such as a browser. With this connection in place, sensitive data can be safely transmitted. The certificate may be either a self-signed SSL certificate or a trusted SSL certificate. By default, the data pipeline installer generates a self-signed SSL certificate that's appropriate for temporary use or for use behind your firewall. However, some applications cannot use a self-signed certificate and instead require a trusted SSL certificate. A trusted SSL certificate is issued and signed by a well-known third-party certificate authority. Before going into production or using the licensed data pipeline software, obtain your own trusted SSL certificate and copy it to a location that the server software can access. The third required component is a database to store user information and definitions of your data sources. It can be either internal, that is, embedded within the data pipeline server software, or external. By default, the data pipeline installer creates an internal HSQL database for temporary or evaluation purposes. Ensure that port 9001 is available, or identify another port to use. For a licensed production environment and for disaster recovery, create an external Oracle database in a location that the data pipeline server can access, and create at least one administrative user and one regular user. Other database vendors will be added. Please note that you cannot migrate data from an internal to an external database. Progress uses a one-way hash function for security. Since passwords cannot be recovered, migration is not possible. So if you initially use an internal database and later decide to use an external database, you'll lose your user information and data source definitions. The fourth component, the Open Access Server, is necessary only if you are using Eloqua as a data source. In the future, other data sources may also require an Open Access Server. Install the Open Access Server in a location that the data pipeline server can access. System requirements are a 64-bit Linux machine with a minimum of 4 CPUs, 8 GB of RAM, and 60 GB of disk space. Because the Open Access and the data pipeline servers compete for resources, install Open Access on a different machine to avoid performance issues. Supported operating systems are CentOS, Oracle, Red Hat Enterprise, and SUSE. Ensure that port 7390 is available or identify another port to use. The next component is the on-premises connector. It is required only if you install the data pipeline in a private or third-party cloud and if your data sources are on-premises. The connector ensures secure transmission of data through the firewall. Install the connector in a location that the data pipeline server can access. System requirements are a Windows machine with any edition of Windows 7, 8, or 10, or Windows Server 2008 or 2012 64-bit. The final components are the drivers. A JDBC driver is required for JDBC applications, and an ODBC driver is required for ODBC applications. If you're using OData, no driver is needed. Install the driver on the same machine as the application that will be using it. For an evaluation license, Progress recommends this installation process. If you have an Eloqua data source, install the Open Access Server. When you install the data pipeline, choose the evaluation license, choose the self-signed SSL certificate, use the automatically created internal database, and configure the Open Access Server if needed. If the data pipeline is in the cloud and data sources are on-premises, install an on-premises connector. Finally, install the JDBC or ODBC driver if you use an application that requires it. For a regular license, Progress recommends this installation process. Create an Oracle database to contain user and data source information. If you have an Eloqua data source, install the Open Access Server. When you install the data pipeline, enter your license key, use your own trusted SSL certificate, configure the external Oracle database, and configure the Open Access Server if needed. If the data pipeline is in the cloud and data sources are on-premises, install an on-premises connector. Finally, install the JDBC or ODBC driver if you use an application that requires it. So far, our scenario has been for a complete installation. You'd also perform a complete installation if you uninstall the product, then run the installer again. However, you may simply need to move to a new release of the data pipeline or make changes to an existing installation, such as a different license key or SSL certificate, or different settings for the Open Access Server or database. In those cases, perform an upgrade rather than a full installation. Rerun the data pipeline installer. Once it detects that the data pipeline has already been installed, it prompts you to upgrade. This way you can make only the changes you need and preserve the rest of your information. This video has reviewed the information you need to successfully plan an installation of the data pipeline. We've covered the types of licenses, the data pipeline components and requirements, and the recommended order for installing components. Once the installations are complete, there are a few additional configuration steps you'll need to take to access your data sources and use your applications. After you've installed the data pipeline server and, if necessary, the on-premises connector, browse to the data pipeline user console to create definitions for each of your data sources. If you're using OData, this is also how you'll define the OData parameters. If you're using a JDBC or ODBC driver, configure and test the driver to ensure it connects to the data source definition. Finally, configure your business tools and applications to access your data source definition using JDBC, ODBC, or OData. There will be additional user assistance videos on these topics. In the meantime, if you don't see a data pipeline video for these topics, take a look at the corresponding DataDirect Cloud video instead. To learn more about the data pipeline, take a look at our online documentation, videos, README files, and release notes. There is also a new community forum for the data pipeline where you can ask questions and get expert answers. We've also created an installation checklist that summarizes this video in just a couple of pages. You can download and use it to create your installation plan. Links to all of these resources are available in the information panel. Please take a moment to leave a comment or share this video. Thanks for watching.